Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Creative Goo. Hopefully, you're all gonna have a great time. I see there's 4 people so far. Conan D70, welcome, welcome. Hey, Tessum. I don't know your real names, but Big Hair Alpacas. It's nice to see you. And T Cat. Awesome, nice to see you. I love those little icons. Very creative. Right along the theme of Creative Goo. Love to see you. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit about what this is going to be all about. We are a creative stream, kind of like a podcast. We'll be talking about all things creative. To keep it a little focused, it's tabletop gaming. So for those of you that are interested in some of the ancillary things like my sculpting or 3D printing, we'll be talking about that. But almost everything I do is related in some way to my passion for tabletop gaming. So uh, definitely going to be talking quite a bit about that. Hey, Geeky, nice to see you. Welcome to the stream. And I will be monitoring the chat for questions. If you have any, as I go through today, I'm by myself, but future episodes, we will definitely have guests. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Thanks for letting me know. Um, Let me talk you through a little bit of my history as a creative member of the gaming community. So, I've been gaming for quite some time. Some of you may not even know about that historical part of the gaming lifestyle. Started in the 80s, but I don't have a lot of pictures from that time. So the longest pictures from the past is in the year 1991 or 1992, and I'm going to show that here really quick and give you an idea of the kinds of things I did way back when. So there was a D&D campaign called uh, Dark Sun, and they produced some miniatures. And of course, since I was a big fan, I had to paint those miniatures up and use them on my table. So let me show you real quick. Um, Here we go. Oh, yeah, those are the real miniatures. So you can see right here, I have them. I have them mounted because I don't use them anymore. And I have a photo so you can see in detail the miniatures that I printed. So let me jump to that. And you can see on the screen here, these are printed in 1991 or 1992. I painted these up. I purchased them from the manufacturer. They were a authorized miniature manufacturer. I want to say Ralpartha, but I can't guarantee that. I want to give credit where it's due. Ralpartha no longer creates miniatures. Hey, Mandy. Hey, Tessam. Thanks for letting me know that I'm coming through clear. My first stream, I want to make sure you can hear me very well. One of the reasons I wanted to show you this picture of the miniatures is while I loved them at the time and I love them today, probably not the best painter in the world, right? So it's really important for everybody to understand that you start at a place and then you improve over time. So um, after this, I have pictures from about 2005. And this is a picture or a sculpt I painted. And this is a miniature from Rackham Miniatures, and here's his partner. Zoom in a bit, and I'm also very happy with how these both turned out, and really shows that my painting did change in 10 years or so, 15 years, and then I have uh, miniatures that I painted just this year, and so this is from Metal King Studios. And again, great miniature. Really enjoyed painting this guy and showcasing how my paintings changed over the years. And so this is where I started in the creative side for uh, my creative journey, as you might say, with these kind of miniatures. But I always felt that there was something missing. And I want to show you guys something else I did if I can get to it really quick. There we go. So I moved to sculpting. And so this is a miniature I sculpted in putty. So it was called Green Stuff, and I sculpted physically. So you can see this is a cork. So this is a 1 inch tall miniature that I sculpted. Let me zoom into the next one. And you can see that you're basically using this was like the a nail or a paper clip that I used for his cane, and you're basically sculpting in this size. I had a lot of fun. I did a lot of miniatures using putty. You make your own tools. It's very much driven by your ability to sculpt and manage by hand. And I thought that would be cool to show people the journey. And now I sculpt digitally, and so many of you already know this, but let me see if I can find a picture. Yeah, here we go. This is a render from the software. This miniature is actually available today, and it's just a really actually relatively fast sculpt. I was able to sculpt this in a couple of hours on the computer, and this is a render I generate. Most of my renders looked like this because I originally sculpted in this green stuff. I certainly wanted to sculpt, or when I render, I have this homage to the green stuff I originally sculpted in. So it looks very much like it would look if I sculpted in that epoxy putty two-part. It was called green stuff because it's blue yellow. You mix them together and it creates this green clay-like resin that cures over time. And so this is the green, and then I printed on a 3D printer. Let's see if I can bring that up. And here we have a printout of that same uh, character. And so I've painted up a bunch of these to give as gifts to some of our local friends. And he's available for sale for people that have their own 3D printers. But as we talk about all things creative, almost everything for me started with the miniatures. I didn't use terrain very much back in the old days. Let me show you guys my face again. Give me 1 second. Here we are. I'm back on screen. So I didn't use terrain very much. What we had in those days is a battle map. Usually just a big sheet of that you could use wet erase markers on, and you would draw the rooms. You would create the environment and use your imagination. And then I would put miniatures on the map. And I never realized that terrain was a possibility at the beginning. There was no internet back in the when the Earth was still cooling, and I was playing D&D with friends and family, and so we didn't know. And so it wasn't until later that I started interacting with more gamers, seeing pictures in magazines, that there were other options. And so some of my creativity has moved to um, other areas of technology, and uh, I started making terrain. And in a future session, I want to talk about the different things you can do at your table, whether you do Dwarven Forge, which is common in our GUI Cube family, or if you do other things. So uh, I do crafted terrain most of the time. I do 3D printing too sometimes for buildings and things like that. But I focus mostly, really, when I do terrain on doing it by hand. Hey, Blood Mist Axe, welcome to the stream. And Geeky, you asked how big of a learning curve is there to 3D printing? And that is the question of the day. I'll probably spend an entire episode talking about 3D printing, but it is a hobby. It's not something, and this is something I don't enjoy, to be perfectly frank. I don't like the 3D printing part. I like what comes out, but the hobby aspect of 3D printing is not my favorite thing. Um, hey Zane, so if you go into it thinking it's a hobby, you're going to be successful. You're going to have fun because 3D printing requires tweaking and tuning. I have a really good friend in Northern California, and he rescues old 3D printers and he gets them working again. He upgrades their parts and he really makes them sing and dance for him. It's just not something I enjoy doing. And there's different 3D printing technologies, and those 3D printing technologies give you different results. And we can talk more about that either today or in a future episode based on interest. So we can talk more about that um, if that's of interest to you guys, right? So I'm going to be talking about creative processes. One of the things that I will have a future episode on, let me find my notes. I want to talk about the different kinds of creativity, right? I paint miniatures. So the painting of miniatures is a super fun aspect. There's a lot of people that are painters. It goes way back. There's techniques, there's showcasing people's miniatures. Love to have some guests on that. This whole sculpting thing is definitely accessible to everybody. I'm going to show a little bit about that tonight, show you guys my workflow a little bit. You'll see me sculpting and then taking that digital product and printing it so that you can paint it and put it on your table, give it as gifts. So that's definitely part of the creative journey that I'm the most passionate about. But there's other things, like I said, there's the creating scenery and terrain for your games to really get an immersive situation. There's map making and either physical maps to use at your table or digital maps to use in your VTTs, those virtual tabletops. I actually play in virtual games and physically at the table, so I can talk a little bit about um, the both sides of this coin of the digital play and the tools and creativity you can bring to the digital side, as well as the physical side. And, you know, I just love the tactile environment and having miniatures on the tabletop. But what I often do virtually is I'll take pictures of my miniatures and those become the objects in the virtual tabletop. It's a photo of my miniature and made into a token. So I certainly try and bring both of it together. Hey, Rolo Burning Sky, thanks for the kind comments. And Lady Hawk, the price of 3D printing has definitely come down, but there is a lot of upkeep and maintenance. You just have to have a space for it. You don't want to put it in your bedroom, for example. There's either heat generated from the printer itself, or if you're dealing with resin, it is a chemical, and there are some safety things you want to do. You want to be in a well ventilated space. So if you're in an apartment, in a small space, I actually did print for a while in a small space. I had to put the printer in a room with the fan and the windows open. So 3D printing is definitely something you want to research before you do it. Skeeters, yeah, I sculpted skeeters and I put them in my game, and then I bought somebody else's a skeeter model and printed it at very large size. And it turned out to be a great creature in a game we played at Gen Con a couple of years. Conandy, you're right. There's a lot of noise when you're 3D printing, depending on the printer. I have a Saturn II 8K, very, very nice printer. It uses resin, and it is quiet compared to the original printers I've owned. Um, it really depends on the printer how much noise there is, but it's reduced the amount of motion. The only thing that moves is the Z-axis. And again, you guys are going to have me geek out on 3D printing, even though it's not my favorite thing. I'd rather talk about sculpting. But certainly willing to answer questions and show people the printers I use. In fact, let me do something else magical here. Let me put on a logo really quick, and then I'm going to bring up a video. Seems everybody's interested in this. So this is the room I have in my house for hobby crafting and 3D printing. So there's some Easter eggs in here I focused on. So there's a piece of artwork I have that you might recognize if you're a member of the Goo family. This is the actual table where I do a lot of my crafting. I also have it set up so I can tear down and set up this photo booth so I can photograph my miniatures. Another hobby that I had to learn how to photograph miniatures so that they showcase. And then I have this Anycubic, which is a filament printer, and I can print very large objects. This is a professional workhorse from Form Labs. It's a Form 3. This is not a 3D printer, and there's some secret miniatures inside there. It's a curing station so that you can do post processing of your prints. And then this is that Elegoo Saturn I was talking about. I print on this the most nowadays. It's very, very good. And then I have this small Epax printer, and this is where I print the translucent things. So if you've gotten one of those green gooey cubes for me, that's what prints it. Another Easter egg, this map might show up if you have the Darkenhaven box set coming to you. And in every room that I have, I've got miniatures. So here's a bunch of miniatures that I have on display. Another Easter egg for you Goo fans. And then some shelves of older products that I own, and some miniatures I have on display that aren't fantasy. I have my fantasy miniatures actually in a whole separate room, but I thought you guys might like to see this. I recorded this earlier, and thought you might like to take a look at that. So, does anybody have any questions as I'm rambling about my hobby and my gaming and things like that? I'm about to bring up my workflow a little bit, but happy to answer questions in the meantime. The other thing that I think is creative and people think about is if you're writing adventures that your characters are playing through, that's definitely a creative activity, and we want to do that. And then illustration is something I'm passionate about. I used to draw as a kid. That's where it all started. I definitely focused on that part of the activity too. And I have some uh, techniques I use today for the illustrations that I do for games. And then the other thing, again, is the ancillary things. I know somebody in the family makes shot glasses with really cool images on them, and that kind of creative activity that's gaming adjacent. I would love to talk about that. And then there's dice accessories, GM screens. There's just so many things that you can do to make a gaming part of your passion and let your geek flag fly. So make sure. Oh man. All right, so let me get us back get us back going. So I had a little glitch here at the house, no stress. So the first thing, geeky For the special edition Alphinius Goo miniature that I sculpted, I made, I think, 9 hats. That was the first one, and then I have modeled additional hats, um, just to keep the joke going. But they haven't been printed or made available for sale. They were just for fun, and I can certainly make more. I mean, they're just constant, different kind of hats you could put on Alphinius Goo. If you haven't seen those or don't know the story, Alphinius Goo is the founder of Gooey Cube. He's the brainchild behind World of Zayate. Definitely a creative person and does creative stuff. And his character, this Alphinius Goo character, doesn't like hats apparently. He's given us lots of reasons why, and many of us have felt that his as a wizard, he should be wearing a hat because wizards wear hats. And so, as a part of the joke, I made hats for the miniature I had sculpted of Alphinius, and I made those available as a special gift. And so you could get this special edition Alphinius Goo in certain circumstances, and he had hats that you could put on him. You could choose which hat to put on the miniature. I've seen those hats show up on gelatinous cubes, on cats, on monsters, because I mean they're miniatures, and so they were just extra hats. And from there, it just kind of ballooned, and there's just more and more things going on. Hey, Alphinius, nice to see you. And then I saw another question here. Where do I draw inspiration from when I decide to model? So that's a great question, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to bring up the software here and kind of walk through how I 3D model and the things you have to think about when you're modeling for printing. But most of the inspiration comes from either reading a book, seeing other artists, so 2D illustrations. Frank Frazetta and is one of my earliest inspirations from an artistic standpoint. Wayne Reynolds, many of you know, he was an artist for Wizards of the Coast, did a lot of work for Dungeons and Dragons, and then later for Pathfinder. He's definitely an inspiration of mine. Matt Wilson of Privateer Press is a major inspiration for me. I love the art direction of the Privateer Press products, War Machine, Hordes. I have a lot of Trollkin from that world, and I can actually pull up that model. I just recently entered a competition, and I modeled a troll based on that. So let me bring that up and show everybody what I'm talking about. So I'm going to bring up ZBrush. That's the modeling software that I use. It's certainly it's a professional piece of software, and they charge professional prices. There are cheaper products. I'm actually going to show a ZBrush product called ZBrush Core Mini, and I'll probably do that next time. And I can show you that I can model very effectively in that software, and it's free. And there's Blender, and there's other modeling software, and we can talk about that in more detail in another episode too. Again, being creative, there's just hundreds of different applications you could potentially use to accomplish what you want to accomplish as a modeler or a sculptor. So I'm going to get through the introduction screens here real quick, and then I can show everybody ZBrush. So this is ZBrush. It's on my monitor. It's in my studio. I use it. I'm in this every day when I'm not working. I'm sculpting or modeling, and then I'll go paint after I print it. So, but I just find a lot of joy here. So let's see if I can find. Do I have the troll in here? No, I don't. Let's see. I know where to find it though. seeing this. There we go. And that. There we go. So this is the guy I sculpted, again for a competition, and you can see I can manipulate in 3 dimensions, and so it's actually multiple characters. There's this guy on the barrel, so there's the barrel is one piece. Why did it do that? I don't want to see that or that. Let me go back to him. So there's this little guy on the barrel. There's another guy on his shoulders with his own cigar. And then there's the troll. And let me solo him. And you can see I have the troll ruffian that I made. And on Lasoc, let me answer your question in just a second. You can kind of see a little bit of that, what you're calling kit bashing. So I made this troll first, and it was based on an illustration that I've always loved. And then I had a guy similar to this little dude, and I just made him look more like the first troll, with the boots and the crossed arms. And then from that guy, I made the guy that can basically I adjusted his pose and gave him the cigar and sat him on top of the troll's shoulders and then put them all together. The other thing that you're asking is, can I model and kit bash? And so let me show you something for me. So I have a kit bash folder. These are all models I've created, and then I add them to other projects. So if I need to find a weapon, I've already modeled dozens of weapons for different projects, and I can bring them in. So let me open this one. And so for another project, I modeled this dancing weapon. So in D&D, there's a spell, spiritual weapon, and so I have 2 of them. So if I solo, I have one here with the hammer floating around and fighting, and then I have another with a blade floating around and fighter. So those are kit bash. So I can take that sword and give it to anybody I want as a sculpt, and it's got the little skull face and stuff like that. Now sometimes when I go back, I don't like the model anymore. So as you move forward, the models you make get better. You learn how to do things better, but you still can use them. And the software itself has changed. So originally, ZBrush was a digital tool. It was purely for making models for movies and video games and things like that. 3D printing has become so big that they've added features for people like me that are going to 3D print. And so those features make my life easier, which is one of the reasons I invest in ZBrush, so I get access to those features. So there's actually in the tool, let's see if you guys can see that. There's a 3D printing hub that's part of the software. And so it allows me to do things perfect to help me 3D print, so I can export and analyze and do things that make it easier to 3D print. But even then, I have to make adjustments to the model outside ZBrush so that it'll print successfully. And when we talk about 3D printing, we can certainly do that. The other thing that I was able to do, I don't know if I have this handy. I might find it better over here. So you can see I have this whole GUI creations, and I have tons and tons of GUI files, and see all of these. There's so many things. I've made so many characters. Let's see if I can find it. I'm looking for. Is this it? Nope. Hope you're comfortable with silence. It's going to take me a minute. Nope. I basically made a bike, a steampunk bike with a rider, and I'm not seeing it because I don't remember the person's name. So sometimes I know who the person is in the GUI family, and sometimes I don't. So I'm not seeing the character, so that's okay. Um, but anyway, I basically a lot of the techniques when you're modeling are kit bashing. So like if I'm working on a car, I model the wheel, then the tire, and then I'm going to do the car body, and then maybe some accessories. So the concept of making the pieces is what makes it easier when you're doing 3D models. So not every sculpting package makes that easy, but Blender, ZBrush, and packages like that allow you to have multiple parts that you can see on this in your scene. And then if you're going to 3D print it, you have to decide you're going to print it as one piece or you're going to print it as multiple pieces. And the example I can give for that actually, I can show. I don't want these guys. So I sculpted this. It's based on a creature in the world of Zayate called a Chiga. It's a spider-like creature with these this smoke or this mist coming off of it, and it was drooling. And so I have the drool, but printing the drool with the miniature becomes a problem when you're 3D printing. In fact, this model would be even better if the mist and smoke on its back was printed separately, so the legs are more likely to print successfully. So it looks really nice on the screen. If I render it, that's a nice little model. But 3D printing, you have to be thinking about or how fragile are these legs going to be. And when you're modeling for 3D printing, you have to think about different things than if you're just modeling to do an illustration. And so some of you have seen my black and white illustrations, the pencil work. Well, I have a secret for you. I'm modeling them in 3D software and then rendering them as a pencil sketch. So it works like that. So do you mode from a block of blank material, or is it more like painting in 3D? You are modeling. So let me go ahead and make something new. Let's just start over. You guys are really asking great questions. This is awesome. I appreciate everybody, being here and participating. So let's grab. This is really sculpting software, although you can do box modeling. And so I can do hard surface stuff in this software without having to learn two tools. So another thing I love about ZBrush. But you can do everything you can do, you can sculpt. So I usually start with a sphere. Oh, let me make it a Polymesh 3D, make it a little bit smaller. And you have different brushes. And so let's do this. So you're basically modeling right on the model, right? So let's say I'm gonna just model here. So that's what you're doing, and you can change the size and the scope of what you're doing. So maybe I want it to be really big, right? Well, that doesn't look like much because I'm just showing you how the brushes might work. The other thing that's nice about 3D software like this is I can actually work symmetrically. So let me undo all of that junk. And my microphone's right where my arm works when I sculpt, so I'm not going to be the best sculptor in the world with this. But when I'm working in this mode, shrink my brush. Why aren't I? Oh, I'm not in symmetry because I'm not facing forward. So you can see where I work. So let's get rid of that too. So back to where, let's say I want to do eyes. Make a spooky little ghost. So I'm just carving right in like I would if I had a little ball of clay, right? And then I can build up because I want my ghost to have something around the eyes. And you're like, okay, that doesn't look very good. I can smooth that down. Now I have little ghosty eyes, right? And so you're like, well, it doesn't really look like a ghost. Let's give it kind of a ghostly body. Now, in 10 seconds, I've made the worst ghost you've ever seen sculpted in your life. Right? So you want to, the one thing you have to learn when you're working in 3 dimensions, it's actually a 3 dimensional object. So let's say I want to flatten this out and I'm working for a while and I'm really liking it. And then, uh-oh, that bag looks terrible. What am I going to do? So you do have to move around. The other thing that you have to keep in mind if you're miniature sculpting is how is this going to read when it's 1 inch tall? Well, I can guess by making it 1 inch tall. So that's about what it's going to look like, you know, if I printed it out. That's about 1 inch, right? So from, let me give you guys a quick look. So from here to here, from here to here, that's about an inch, right? So you can, take advantage of that, but you learn things that you can and can't do with the physical nature of 3D printing, working with this model. So this is actually a terrible looking ghost. I'm really embarrassed to show you, but there's all kinds of tools you can do to help. So let me grab one. And what it does is let me show you something else. So everything you do is you're just moving polygons on the screen. So these are just points on a 3D space, and it basically takes 4 points, connects them to create a square. Well, that square lives in 3 dimensional space, and so it wraps an object with all these polygons, which I'm showing you. And so you can make fewer polygons. So here's hardly any polygons. So now you can see this little area is a square, and so it puts all those squares together to make a 3D object. And so the more squares you have, the more polygons, the more detail you can do. So if I let's see, yeah, there we go. Now it's super dense. Now there are 5 million of those squares. Well, we certainly don't want to work with 5 million today. So I would go back to some other number and turn it back down. So this is more reasonable. This is 62,000 points times 4, right? But now it looks like a ghost, right? So, but yeah, you'd want to make some other changes to it. Maybe go back to a big brush. I want this front to come out. I'd go even bigger, maybe. And maybe go back to the back to make sure he's a ghost from the front and the back, right? And if you want him to look like cloth, maybe his eyes need to go in a little more. I need a smaller brush. Right? Smooth that out a little bit. Let me turn off the look of the polygons, and you can see what used to be polygons, even though I've gotten more smoothed out. Parts of the model is still remembering that old um, uh, group. So let's see if I can change that. Smooth it a little bit, but I can smooth it, right? There's tools I can use to make it smooth. But then again, do I really need to if, let me scale it down. This is how big it's going to be when it prints. So am I going to see those flat surfaces? And hey, Randy. So we there's just so many different tools, and what you'll find is there's a lot of features here in ZBrush, but I only use a few of them when I'm creating a character. Most of the rest of the features are used either for refinement. So if you remember that troll, oh, I've closed him. Let me find him again. Oh, I'll just use something cool from in here. Let's do this. So if I have this guy, so when I first built them, there was no fur. I added the fur at the end for texture, and he printed out pretty good. But what I find is, so you guys look at him, and he's got these 4 eyes. He's kind of really scary looking, right? Well, the challenge with this, though, is I printed him out, and he prints out about this big, maybe a little bigger, so I'll make it a little bit bigger so you get the idea. Can you see those 4 eyes? And then I painted him, and you can't tell because the painting I put on his eyes wasn't contrasted enough with the rest of him. And so it's really interesting to learn how to do this stuff. So if I was going to do this again, I don't usually go back and redo models, but if I were going to, I'd make his eyes bigger. And so that's why a lot of times the physical miniatures, when you get them, you're like, why is his hand so big? Or why are his eyes so big? They're not in proportion for real things. It's so that it'll read when you're playing a game on the table. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody and you can see it. And so the detailing and things like that, you can do. The other thing somebody was asking is I made one tooth and then I just replicated the tooth inside his mouth. And I can maybe show that you guys another day when I'm just talking about sculpting. So the other thing to be aware of is even though this looks like it's going to make a great 3D print, it may not. There's some technical things you have to deal with, and I'll talk about that another day. But I do the art first, and then once I have something that I love, then I adjust it so that it can be printed. So that's, showing you some of the texture that you can do in ZBrush. So if we come back to the ghost, yeah, let me cover real quick what I mean when I say it may not work. So if I'm looking on the computer, let me do something really wacky. There's a method to my madness. Give me a second. And I'm not going to explain what I'm doing because it's just going to illustrate a problem. All right, so I've got this ghost. He looks great, right? And you think, wow, I should be able to print this guy. Well, I've created my own problem, but not on purpose. So if I look on the back, there's a hole. It's like, well, why can't I print through the hole? Well, if I zoom in and zoom in some more, if the software will let me, I normally don't use a mouse. So let me zoom in some more. It really wants to zoom around this thing. I zoom in, and now I'm inside the model, right? That's the problem. So I can't print in visible space. Another way I can show that is with another 3D object. So let me add a 3D object to this little sculpt here. I've got this sheet. Well, Ghosts are made of sheets, right? So I should be able to print this sheet. The problem is in digital space, there's only one side. Well, I can't 3D print a one-sided object. It has to have thickness, right? So it's easy to see on this 3D, on this plane, that if you turn it, it disappears completely because it only has one side. So that's the biggest problem with printing, is that hole makes the product, makes this model not solid. It's not a whole, it's not a 3D object. It's basically one sheet stretched around, but there's still only one side, right? So yes, the ghost got back. So he's really got back. So these are things you have to watch out for when you're modeling or when you're merging two pieces together. So let me close the holes there. Now he's a solid model again. Oh, that's another thing I can show you guys. So as you noticed when I was smoothing, there's an artifact here. Well, the computer is fine with it, but what you see again is it's a one-dimensional or two-dimensional object, not a three-dimensional object. Well, the computer, when you send it to a printer, the printer is going to say, what do I do? And it's just going to crap out. So you can't have little floating objects like that. Just some really quick, easy stuff to show you that 3D printing, after you've done the art, there's some technical bits, and I don't enjoy the technical bits at all because I'm an artist. So we have this ghost, and he's looking pretty good, but maybe I want him to be a rotten ghost, so I could maybe give him some texture, and let's give him some bumps, and so you can easily see it. This is stuff, these things, these features in ZBrush, it's one of the things it's famous for, is being able to texture your models really quickly and easily, and people have a lot of fun with it. But as an artist, you want to make sure your model looks right before you do this. So if this was an actual character, was the symmetry correct? Were the forms of the face correct before you started doing the texturing? So if you get the texturing too fast, that can be a challenge. So it's just so much fun. And so you can see why I love this so much. Oh, that's a great question, Feldari. Welcome to the stream. Overhang for 3D printing isn't a problem if it's supported, right? So you need to worry about supports. And I'll have to show you that in, let me show you that really quick, because this is just jumping all over the place. So this is my ghost. I'm not planning to print him, but let me bring up my 3D printing software really quick. We'll use this one because I can show supports the best with the software. So this is the software I use for my EPAX X1 and my Saturn. So this is the build plate of my Saturn. And if I put a model in here, oh, I don't have one handy. So give me 1 second. I'll grab one. And I'll do the scarecrow. So you can see the scarecrow here. Now this, I can't print like this because the square grid is actually a build plate. And so something has to stick to that build plate, and then it prints one layer at a time. So what you do is you create supports. All right. So if there's an overhang, there can be supports between. So if I change let's change the angle so I can show you what a overhang is for those of you following along. I can get this to rotate. So you can see his pumpkin head is bigger than the rest of him, and then there's the space under his arm. Let me zoom in a lot closer. And you can see under his arm there's not much there. It prints fine, but there's not much there. So when you build supports inside this software, what it's going to do is provide support. So you can see this part of his body or his robe or whatever it is has its own support. These gray things are support. So it prints this whole thing. So there's a little space on the base where it prints the first layer, and then these poles are printed with it, these supports. And in a later episode, I'm going to show you guys final 3D print and with the supports, and I can show you taking them off. So you take off these supports after it's printed. The other example here that shows really cool, if I can get it to zoom where I want it to. Whoop, too far. You can see inside his mouth, it still wants to create more support. So let me click away. Inside his mouth, there are little supports too, so that the teeth get printed. And so that's part of the whole modeling. And so I might think it needs more supports. And so I have to do some custom work. So you can 3D print things that you couldn't mold with a traditional miniature mold process without breaking it into multiple parts. You may still want to break it into multiple parts for other reasons, like if it's got wings and it gets big, you might want multiple parts. But you don't have to worry about molding. If you can print it, you just have to get those pieces off. And so this is for a resin printer, which gives you a lot of flexibility. One thing I can show you here on this design, there's this grain in his pitchfork that doesn't show up when it prints. So you can have all kinds of detail, and then you forget that he's going to print at about an inch tall, and the detail's lost, like his robe or his shirt. I put some like it was thread or whatever, and it shows a little bit as texture, but it's mostly noise. For want of a better word. So it paints up pretty cool, but you can't tell what the original intention was. So that's the other thing you learn. Whereas in his arm, you can see I created this wood texture that works really, really well in the painted version. And I'll get pictures of that. I have another camera here in my studio, but it won't zoom in up close. It's an old computer webcam for like Zoom or something. And so until I get better technology, I have to record it in advance. So I'd have to be prepared to share it with you. But this is my annual Halloween miniature. It's the dude with the pitchfork. I finished my annual Christmas ornament. I'm painting up those. I'll probably show those in a future episode. This guy is available online for anybody that wants to buy him. He's only $1 for those of you that either have a 3D printer or know someone with a 3D printer. You can grab them and make them available and print them out. He was pretty fun. It's stylized. He's obviously not as detailed as some of the characters I might make. So let me close this out. And again, in future episodes, I can talk about the do's and don'ts of 3D printing, the difference between a filament printer, a resin printer, the different kinds of resin printers you could potentially buy, and then different kinds of resin, the different kinds of filament. There's just a lot of detail there, depending on what you want to do. So the best example I can give you is when I'm printing buildings or walls for my game, I use the filament printer. It's a lot cheaper, and I don't need perfect detail. And I can take advantage of the technology creates almost a texture, and when I'm painting it, I can take advantage of that texture. Resin printers, it's so detailed now, the human eye can't tell where the lines are, which is perfect. It's like a real manufactured product. And let me get to a better video so you guys can actually see my face. When you're printing on a resin printer, it's so the detail is so good, it's as if you bought it from the store. In fact, Privateer Press, one of my favorite miniature companies, they'd stopped printing metal miniatures because it got too expensive, and then they stopped manufacturing in traditional plastic. They actually print with a resin 3D printer, just like I do, as a manufacturing tool. So they're working with a company with a warehouse of 3D printers. They clean it up, package it, and ship it, and it's a packaged product using resin 3D printing as a technology. So to keep it affordable and to keep the business running, that's the technology they moved to, and it's the same technology I use. Now, what's interesting is they wouldn't share with me the resin they're using. They have a special resin formula to make the miniatures durable, but maintain the detail and not deform over time. And so that's the chemistry involved in resin printing. And I don't think anybody's going to be that interested in that stuff. Other question? Yeah, gooey science, absolutely geeky, absolutely. So let's see what else. Again, you can buy STL files. That's the file type for 3D models. Sometimes OBJ. So other people have done the sculpting, like me, and you can buy it in 3D print. Some of them will even do the supports for you, so that you just plug it in and run it. The pre-done supports, depending on the company, can be good. It can be bad because every printer is a little bit different. But that gives you the option of printing whatever you want. The example I can give you too is there's a company called Hero Forge, and they've created an engine where you can customize a character. And once you like it, you can obviously get a render that you could put on your character sheet. You can have them print it and ship it to you, or you can purchase the STL and print it yourself. And you can make a lot of characters, both fantasy, sci-fi, and modern characters, using their tool. There's going to be a point where it's not even going to be worth it for me to sell character miniatures, because you can customize to your heart's content. And then once it's reached critical mass, then you just have it printed or you render it out or whatever. Artists, will still be able to do art, but from a business productivity standpoint, you should check out Hero Forge. There's other companies too that do that. I think it's Eldritch Foundry, but you should check them out too. But really, really good stuff. And we're approaching the top of the hour. Boy, this went really, really fast. And I, loved having you guys here. Love you guys. Your feedback and your comments have been really fun for me. And Geeky, you're right. So libraries, schools, maker spaces, clubs, they have printers that you can use. Now, often you have to schedule time, and it's different than a laser jet, right? So a 3D printer takes hours, and so you have to schedule time and mask out the time you're going to need for your project to complete. A detailed model from me that's big, that's going to take a day to print on a resin printer. It's more than 8 hours. The smaller character models, those you can print in 6-8 hours. So it really depends. So anyway, I think we're going to call this a complete session. Happy that you guys are here and part of it. And we will meet again next week, and I'll dive into more detail. I'll be inviting guests to come in the future. And exclamation point D, everybody. Thank you guys so much, and have a gooey day. Take care.